What lurks from behind tall trees. All right, good evening and welcome to From Behind Tall Trees, the live super chat that does not play favorites. It's a show that gives everyone a chance to speak their mind, present their evidence, and tell their story, which in turn allows you, the viewer, an opportunity to make an educated decision as to what you believe. This show looks to stomp out confirmation bias and general Sasquatch stupidity. And who knows, we might just find out what's really going on when it comes to this Bigfoot thing. So as you may or may not know, my name is Brendan Brown. I am founder and director of the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Now, Sean Wagner, the guy who usually sits in the co-host seat, called in a few hours ago to let me know that he had come down with a sudden case of not feeling good. And unfortunately, he's unable to co-host the show with me tonight. Now, lucky for us, sliding into the jump seat and filling in for Sean tonight is a man that needs no introduction in the northern part of New Jersey, especially Sussex County. The area between the Dunkin' Donuts and the CVS in the town of Sparta. He is by far the nicest guy in the CARC. My friend and yours, Jonathan Charles, Big Chuck Larson. Charlie, Chuck, you there?
I'm here, Brendan. Thanks for the game.
How you doing, boss?
You forgot about the Exxon gas stations in Walmart.
Well, it was a last-minute thing. You know, Sean called and said he wasn't feeling well, so I had to go to Google and find out where exactly you live and see that Sparta does exist. It's a big show tonight. Big show tonight.
Oh, man, I'm excited. This is, yeah, I'm honored to be on the show, so thanks, man. I appreciate it.
We'll fill it in. That's part of the gig, you know. So before we jump in and get the guest out here, which I can't wait for, we're going to take care of some business from the home office out there in Bailey, Colorado. And to do this, we here at the show need to ask all of you out there a favor. You know, this show and the entire BXP channel that you guys watch really is only made possible through the support of viewers like you guys out there tonight. Well, so liking, subscribing, and sharing the content that we are spitting out here is very important to the survival of this show and others like it. So this show, like we said, is live and it is a super chat. So if you've got any questions at any time, go ahead and type them in the chat section. Use all caps, please, and we'll do our best to get them on the air as soon as we can. And if you're feeling generous, and I know you are, donate to the show, and we'll give you a huge shout-out. You see, donations made during the show support the CARC, help finance our investigations and productions like this. So hit that button, make the donation, feel good about it, and we'll get on with it. So, all right, now that that's done, here we are on another Tuesday night and another monster show. Like I said, Charlie, you know, we don't skimp here at From Behind Tall Trees. When it comes to booking guests, we get the good ones, right, Chuck?
Yeah, oh yeah, man, you're the king at it.
Well, one amazing talent follows another amazing talent, and tonight, this guy is no exception. Tonight's guest is a member of what I call Bigfoot researcher royalty. His newsletter, Bigfoot Times, is fast approaching its silver anniversary. The Where to Go When You Need to Know Bigfoot publication has been in print continuously, and we fact-checked this. I checked with him earlier before the show, since Elton John's Candle in the Wind was #1 on Billboard back in 1998.
Wow.
That's a long time. He's a well-known researcher that is not only respected by his peers, but by his peers, other serious-minded Bigfooters, but by the throngs of people who have attended as his lectures and presentations over the many years. This man is a walking encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to all things on the subject of Bigfoot, including the Patterson-Gimlin film, which hopefully, if we're lucky, he'll break down for us tonight. He is also, honestly, and Chuck, you can attest to this, one of the nicest guys you will ever meet within the Bigfoot community.
Yeah,
we are truly honored to have him, to have this reclusive Bigfooter with us tonight, coming to us from an undisclosed location within the Buckeye State, where he spoke at last week's Ohio Bigfoot Conference, the one and only Dan Perez. Come in, Dan. How are you? You there?
I'm here. It's good to be on your show.
There you are, buddy. Good to see you. How are things? How are things out in Ohio? How's the weather compared to Southern California?
A little bit rainy over here, but that's okay. We can handle that.
How long are you going to be in Ohio?
I'll be here for a few more days, and I made a decision when I was asked to speak at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference that I would spend about a week here and follow up on some reports And I wanted to follow up on some activity that was happening in 2019, footprint findings that were followed up by researcher B. Mills. And I wanted to come down. I was writing about it at the time in the newsletter, but I wanted to come down and find out things firsthand.
No,
And
that's good. That's good. So you're in Ohio now. You're originally from Southern California, and you currently still live in Southern California, correct?
that's correct.
How does a boy from Southern California, when I think of Southern California, because I grew up in New York, and I live in New York, and I spent some time in Sacramento, and I spent some time in the Pacific Northwest, but one doesn't really think of Southern California as a place where a child would get steered towards Bigfoot and Sasquatch. What was your childhood like?
Pretty good. I would say probably no different than others.
And so you spent a lot of time outside. What event sparked your interest in I mean, there's Bigfoot, there's people who have a casual interest in Bigfoot. There's people that might watch the TV show. There's people that might read the article or buy a book or get scared by a movie. But you've gone all in over the last several decades. What sparked your interest in serious research of the Bigfoot, of Bigfoot, I'm sorry?
I knew that question was coming. I'm 57 years old now. So at age 10, right around 1973, my older brother and my older sister and myself, we were kind of like into monster movies. And so we asked our parents if we could go see a monster movie. It just happened to be The Legend of Boggy Creek. So when I saw that movie, it hit me like a ton of bricks in the sense that I could not necessarily believe that everything that they were presenting in this pseudo documentary was for real. So that just kind of lit a candle in me in the sense that I wanted to find out more. And by then, my dad, an electrical engineer, had a library card for me. So that's the place where I headed and put things together and started checking out Bigfoot books. So I became one of the avid readers of the topic then, not thinking that I would be more involved, but one thing led to another, and I did become more involved. And so now I'm still involved. And so when I hit the gas pedal at age 10, I never let up. I never put the brakes on.
I see that. It seems like you've gone all in. And for those of you out there, born after 1994, there used to be a thing called a library card, where people would go and check out books and read books, real articles. And I didn't realize how many quality books have been written by people out there. I know, just off the top of my head, a couple of ones that I'm reading right now, I'm rereading Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, and Where the Footprints End. But Dan, you must have read scores of books. Do you have a handful of favorites, and tell us why they would be? Give me your top three and why.
Well, three that come to mind right now, I would say anyone who's a student of the subject, pick up Ivan Sanderson's book, which was published in 1961. And we had a conversation about this at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference.
I'm actually going to write this down where you go. So go ahead.
The late Ivan Sanderson was able to pull off this, I think it's almost a 600-page book without the internet or anything like this. So all of his sources were coming by mail and correspondence by postal mail.
Right.
And you look at that book and it really set a high bar. And I would say of all the books ever published ever, the crowning achievement would have to be Ivan Sanderson to do something like what he did back in the day. I mean, it's a loaded book with some very good photos, very good documentation, massive bibliography, appendixes, and so on and so forth. So people aren't even doing that today with, when you could just Google anything and find out information.
What's the name of the book?
Abominable Snowmen Legend Come to Life, published by Chilton Publishing, 1961.
It's you made a very good point there, Dan. Is this book was put? This guy didn't just jump on his computer and Google search. It was all traditional, snail mail, correspondence, research, going places. Probably, I mean, hardcore research for a 600-page book.
Yeah, and so you think about it, when he was doing this was probably done on a manual typewriter, a manuscript that you had to proof, and so there had to have been several drafts.
Right.
In my view, an extraordinary achievement. Second, let's move on.
Yes, of course.
Second, the top three in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The top four. John Green's book that was published in 1978, and of course, Ivan Sanderson, the first author I spoke about, and John Green are now deceased. John Green's book, 1978, Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us. And that, again, set another high watermark because he focused on all the reports in North America and broke them down state by state. And for instance, I was looking at the book today because I knew I was going to be on the show today, is that in 1978, John Green cataloged, and it's in his maps, 19 reports for the state of Ohio. Since that time, in 2021, that number has just jumped up remarkably. So you think about it, 19 reports in 1978, and the number has just swelled since that time. But it was the best effort in 1978. Moving on, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Moving on, 2006, Sasquatch, The Legend Meets Science by Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who is still a professor at Idaho State University in Pocatello. And that one, again, really did a deep dive in terms of scientifically trying to penetrate the subject, using science as the tool to investigate something that most people think is mythological.
Right, and that, they really did a lot of research with the PG film, I think, in that book as well. You've worked, you've been around for, like you said, you started in the early 90s, probably late 70s actually, to begin your interest in research in the group. So you've been fortunate to work with some of the big names, and we're talking the big boys like John Green, Renee DeHinden, the good Dr. Grover Krantz. And I'm surprised. In today's world, with the Facebook groups and stuff, how many new researchers are completely unaware of the amazing history surrounding names like that in Bigfoot research in the 60s and 70s, and B, the mountain of research those guys and others like them did back then. Most of it, you either have the ability to get your hands on or have read. So I'm sure you've got a story or two about these polarizing Bigfoot characters. You feel like sharing something regarding some of those guys?
Give you a list of some of the researchers that I was in touch with early on.
Great.
By way of postal mail, John Green, Renee DeHinden, Dr. Grover Krantz, Bob Titmus, let's see, Peter Byrne. And Peter Byrne, of all the people those 5 people that I've just mentioned, Peter Byrne is still living.
Yeah.
The others have passed away, but I was told maybe a couple of years back that someone made a comment to me that someone attended a Bigfoot conference, and they said, well, who's John Green? And so that's like wanting to know a little bit about basketball and saying, like, well, who's Kobe Bryant? And so that, I'll tell you some stories about them if you'd like.
Yes, I would love to hear some. I mean, it's rare to have somebody on the show with your background and your ability to tell, share anecdotes and stories. So have at it, Dan.
Well, John Green and Renee DeHinden were partners early on in the quest for the Sasquatch Bigfoot. And they eventually had a falling out. And I guess the falling out was probably due to several things, but John Green was of the opinion that the data needed to be shared beyond just them. Renee DeHinden was of the opinion that we should just keep the data to ourselves because we wanted to be the lucky people to find a Sasquatch. And as you can see, that was a long time ago.
Mhm.
So they eventually split up. And so maybe they didn't have animosity towards one another, but they were estranged, if you will.
Mhm.
And so one of the stories, when I drove up to Canada, flew up to Canada, flew into Seattle, and then got a rental car and went up to Canada to see John Green. But it was for the now defunct Sasquatch Symposium, which was in Harrison Hot Springs.
Okay.
So one morning, and by the way, John Green and Renee DeHinden were both at the conference, but never said boo to one another. So we made a decision. I think it was myself, Tom Steenberg, John Green, and Stephen Harvey to go have breakfast one morning. And so as I'm driving from John Green's house to the restaurant place, and everyone in the vehicle knew that John Green and Renee DeHinden were estranged. And
Yeah.
I made a passing comment to the whole group. And I said, because the way Renee was, I said something like, I bet Renee DeHinden never read the book, How to Influence People and Win Friends. And John, it was the loudest laughter I ever got from John Green. He just could not stop talking. And this was on the way to the restaurant.
That's great.
to just of some of the brief footage that I've seen, and I don't have access to the archives of home movies and videos that a lot of like you have done. It was funny to watch the two of those because it seemed like they were like two kids sometimes, where they just purposely poking at each other to see who could piss the other one off more.
I would agree with that. And, unfortunately, we have a lot of the same type of behavior mechanisms in place today with researchers. And with me, I just don't, and in fact, a little bit of that happened here at this conference where I was the go-between between two people. And I said, I don't really want to be the go-between between two people or two researchers. I said, you guys hash out your argument or whatever and keep that. I think that's the best way to go about it, to keep the peace within the community.
Well, I mean, just in the brief correspondence that we had, leading, and we've been friends for, obviously through the Facebook mechanism, and then a little bit closer when I got the subscription to Bigfoot Times over the last year or so is, and I meant it when I said, you're easily one of the most likable and nicest guys that I've met within the community. Because I know Charlie can attest to this, that sometimes it gets a little tricky. And Charlie's the same way. Charlie is happy sitting on that fence and being the go-between, sometimes between just guys within our group.
Yes.
It's the nature of the beast, though. I mean, it's going to happen in any industry, in any group, and it is what it is.
Oh, it's particularly sour within the Bigfoot thing. Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
I don't think anyone that is living today has spent any time in the field with Bob Titmus. So let's go back to October 1987. I made a decision to go up to the Bluff Creek area and just scout around. And lo and behold, who came down from Canada? Back then there was, if you're making a phone call, it's long distance, but I had no knowledge that Bob Titmus was going to be in the area. He was in Bluff Creek at the same time I was in Bluff Creek. And so as I drove in that valley, the area, there was absolutely nobody there. Absolutely nobody except this old man. And I had seen his pictures in John Green's book. And so I pulled up to him and stopped. And I rolled down my power window on my Volkswagen Jetta. And I said, you wouldn't happen to be Bob Titmus, would you? And he goes, I am. And the next thing I said, because I'm pretty straightforward, I said, you sure have aged since those photos in John Green's book. And he just laughed. He just laughed. But I spent about 3 days with him in the field. And that was, there's really no one on the face of the planet right now who could say that anymore. And I did. And that was in Bluff Creek. And it was just like, that was just a spontaneous type of thing. I didn't know he was going to be there. He happened to be there. So that was great. And I was privileged to hear many of the stories and that he had accumulated up to that time.
And that's what to me is so impressive is there was such a brain trust of researchers and investigators that weren't armchair quarter. They were in there getting their feet dirty, because they had to. That's the only way they were going to get out there and find and get more information. Like you said, not that they not always get along, but there was such a wealth of knowledge between all these characters you're talking about. You got one more story for us there, Dan?
Well, I think that's I have a story with Tom Steenberg, but I didn't mention him earlier.
Tom's going to be on the show in a month or so that'd be great to hear about Tom.
This happened when I was up in Canada again. So I went to the Sasquatch Symposium, and as I recall, I gave a talk. Mm-hmm. And so I stood over, and so I told Tom, I said, why don't we do some camping out in an area where people have had a sighting? And so we did. And so we started going into these small caves that had trees and branches covering the front. So on the way out of one of the caves, it was just myself and Tom Steenberg, and he's behind me. And so what I did is he smokes a pipe, by the way. Just envision he's smoking a pipe. And he happened to have, at the time, a pipe in his mouth. And I know very little about smoking pipes, but the pipe he had was like a two-piece smoking pipe. Like you could take it apart and clean it, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so as I was coming out of the cave, I pushed a big branch out of my way. And for whatever reason, I was just completely oblivious that Tom Steenberg was right behind me. And so I let it loose and it fired back at him. And as it was going, I just said, oh my goodness, Tom Steenberg is directly behind me. So I turned behind myself. I looked behind me, and instead of having the pipe in his mouth, he has just the front piece of it stuck in his mouth. And we had a great laugh over that.
Good stuff, Dan. Good stuff. Beating up on Tom out in the field. We're talking about. Oh, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
And during that trip, we saw a bear. It wasn't a grizzly bear, but it was a big bear cross the road. I think it went from right to left on a dirt trail road. And so Tom and Steenberg and I are, maybe 50 feet away or something like that. We both had our cameras. But by the time it got to the other side and back into the tree line, we were just barely getting our cameras out, and we missed it. So I told Tom, and Tom told me, he said, had that been a Bigfoot, we would have missed it completely.
I think that you hear that story a lot, and we'll get into that later in the interview. Is where people, I've seen it a bunch of times, and I still haven't been able to capture a picture and stuff like that. You've done these lectures and you've educated. It's got to be thousands of people by now. You've started, and you said the mid to early '90s doing these lectures and presentations, and you speak pretty conclusively on the PG film. And I'm pretty sure by now that you've dissected every single frame and every single image and all that stuff with it, all the information you can pull out of that film. What makes that, in your opinion, because you've spent so much time and so much energy and so many years, what makes that such an extraordinary piece of evidence for you?
Well, let's just put it this way. Number one, it's a film. And film, the film resolution on the film of the Patterson-Gimlin film is
no, Bill, hold off, Bill. I'll let you know when to start it, Bill. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
What makes that far and away the best case ever is the evidence that is associated with the Patterson-Gimlin film. So break it down real quick. Number one, there were two witnesses. Forget about the rest for a moment. There were two eyewitnesses. One of them is still living, Bob Gimlin. Number two, instead of having a sighting for about 1 minute, Roger Patterson collected 954 frames of the subject or thereabouts in a 16 millimeter film that is well known as the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination. Mm-hmm. So they have photographic documentation. Number two is after the film was shot, they put in a second roll of film and they shot footage of the tracks in the ground that this thing left behind. number three is the film site was known, the location of the film site was known immediately thereafter. So it wasn't like it was a film on YouTube or a YouTube video posted
Mm-hmm.
and didn't know exactly where it was. Because within that same month, within a little over a week, Bob Titmus was on the film site. So it wasn't like they were hiding anything. Another crucial point is that this is a daytime film where
Mm-hmm.
sunlight is going to expose, if it were a fake, is going to expose all the flaws. You know, if I were faking a film, I'd do it during the nighttime hours where no one could see anything or very little.
Exactly.
And so, and let's see, Bob Titmus was there, and just the film was shot on Friday, October 20th. By Monday, October 23rd, Lyle Laverty, who was working in the area and camped at Louse Camp, south of the film site, his job was for the United States Forest Service, was timber management, and he was figuring out which trees were going to be logged in the area because at the time they were doing logging. But during the weekend when he was went out to town, he was able to find out that some film had been shot there,
Mm-hmm.
allegedly a Bigfoot film. And so when he came back, him and his crew were able to find the film site,
Mm-hmm.
and he shot footprints of the tracks. So if this were all fake, it's just like the last thing you'd want to do, like on a YouTube video today, is name the people that were associated with the film, Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson, and
Mm-hmm.
give away the film site. But
Right.
all of that was given away immediately. And Roger Patterson had made some phone calls trying to get dogs down to the film site to track this creature.
Right.
They weren't successful there, but everything that they were doing was not indicative of people that were committing a hoax.
Well, let's do this. We've got the film. I've got a stabilized version of it. Now this is the full 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So I'm going to let it roll, Dan, and I think you can just give us a play-by-play with what's going on. We're not going to be able to pause it. We're just going to let it run through, and you tell us what's going on and what makes it stand out from you.
This is footage prior to the film. It's just scenery shots. And you see, let's see, I'd have to look a little bit closer, but I think you see images of Bob Gimlin with the pack horse.
Right there, yep.
Right there. And so there were 3 horses. And by the way, the horses' names were Chico, H.O., and Peanuts, I believe. I could be wrong on that last one because I'm having a brain block. But there they are. This is prior footage before the footage of the subject. And so Roger was getting quite a bit of scenery footage before the final 954 frames of the film, where everything takes a big turn.
Right. I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with the film think that it's just that the last frame section, and they don't realize that these guys were there for several days in advance filming and searching. So
what you're seeing right there is what they call the Big Slide area. This is south of the film site on Bluff Creek, and the remnants of the Big Slide are still visible even today. And everything, you look at the film, it all looks very spontaneous. And so here they are riding, and you look at the area, and it seems to be quite open. And prior to the film being shot, there was a big flood that tore out a lot of the real estate in that area. And so that's why it was open and easy to ride their horses in. Yeah, you can see a lot of the trees, a lot of the debris, and the shrapnel from a lot of water going through there. One key thing is that you see the foliage, the autumn colors in fall. So that definitely indicates what time of year this was shot. So those people who say it was shot earlier or in the summertime when everything should have been green, that's incorrect, because there is the visual evidence that would suggest it was shot, like Roger says, in late October. Mm-hmm. So, and the horses that were with him, if they look kind of small, they were small horses. I'm no horse expert, but they weren't what they call like Shetland ponies or anything like this. According to Bob Gimlin, they were just small horses. They weren't like your normal big horse that you normally see.
All right, here we go.
So here's the opening frames of the film. And if you look to the left just before, you could actually see Bluff Creek. And so Roger, according to Roger, he said that we both saw the thing about the same time. Roger's horse was ahead of Bob Gimlin's horse, and Bob Gimlin had the pack horse. And so what you see is just a subject walking away. And so what makes this an extraordinary piece of evidence, it's not just a sighting where someone comes back with a story. They came back with a film of the subject. So over the years, the film site got lost, and it really didn't get lost. It was always there. It just got overgrown.
Mm-hmm.
And so Stephen Strufert, Robert Leiterman, and other people were trying to relocate the film site because it was heavily overgrown. In 2011, 2012, thereabouts, they were able to do that work to say, like, this is what we think that where that film site is, and they were correct in their analysis. And so a group of us went there in July of 2012 in the summertime to absolutely establish that this was a film site, pulled a ton of measurements to the remaining stumps, the remaining trees, to the where the trees are in the background to the creek. And one thing I'll mention is most people that have any knowledge about Bigfoot, they see the famous movie or they see quote unquote frame 352. And because you're looking at a picture, you don't really have any sort of depth perception.
Mm-hmm.
But from the trees in the background to the creek, we pulled a measurement in July of 2012, and that measurement was 269 feet. So, for instance, a football field is 100 yards, so that's 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So from the edge of the creek to the trees in the background, it is roughly almost 3/4 of the way of a football field. So this area is a very big area.
It doesn't look like that on the film. It's very deceiving.
That's the key. So that's the key. You look at a flat picture and it doesn't give you or allows a person to look at it and have the depth perception.
Let's bring up. I've got the stabilized version. There we go. So this is just the stabilized version with what you're talking about there, Dan.
Yeah, so the trees in the background there, in the very, very background, if you pull a tape measure from there to coming back to the cameraman and going past the cameraman and going to the creek, that's about 269 feet.
It does not look like that.
And so the footage that you're seeing right now is, say, right around 100 feet from the cameraman.
Mm-hmm.
That's a comfortable distance where any wild animal would probably just walk away and not necessarily run away, because that's a good amount of distance.
Yeah, it does. It's very deceiving. I want to thank Jamie King for donating hit the donation button for $4.99 there. Jamie, thank you very much. But it is very deceiving that it does look like the camera is right on top, and it does look like it was staged. But if you do the measurements and you do the math and you do the science and you get out there like you did, it's a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, the thing about here's the short course in terms of the accusations that the film was fake is that the film was shot in October of 1967. It's May of 2021. During that time period, you would just do a mental exercise. If that movie footage is a fake, then surely it's a man in a costume and it could be duplicated. But over those 50 plus years, no one has been able to duplicate it. So right there, that should tell you everything. That should speak volumes about the validity of the film. Yeah.
And what do you think now? The film was shot in Bluff Creek. What is so special, in your opinion, with Bluff Creek as opposed to other areas that have allegedly have Bigfoot? What separates Bluff Creek from, say, the state of Michigan?
Well, since the late 50s, when they started building roads in that area, it seemed like these things were living in the area. So it would suggest to anyone that there was a couple of things in place already before the film was shot: water, food supply, deers and vegetation, mates, and forest coverage.
Mhm.
So it was a very closed canopy type of forest. And so you had all those factors, and it seemed like they were living in the Bluff Creek area, going about their business, and they started pushing roads into the area to do logging. And so what's key to the area that maybe other areas do not have is it has some fantastic sandbars that tracks have been deposited on from
That's a very good point. Very good point.
from the 1950s all the way up to the famous PG film, Patterson-Gimlin Film. And you have a whole series of tracks there. And it's just like, so when you have those extraordinary tracks, it's just like people that were involved in the research community would, say like, this is the place to go. And it just seemed like they were living in that area comfortably for quite a bit, and they may still be doing so today.
Now, with Stephen Streufert was on the show a month or so ago, and he gave us a terrific insight about preserving that area for future researchers to come, with respect to not treating it like a Bigfoot amusement park and having people tromp through and disrespect it and leave trash and stuff behind. When was the last time that you've been to the site, Dan?
October of 2018, a
Okay.
group of us went up, and I was able to experiment. My experimentations at this point is, and I guess you could do this anywhere. Can you take a known piece of, say, in this case, a piece of wood to measure an individual, as long as that piece of wood is in the same film plane as the subject, and you have a known measurement of the piece of wood? And during my lecture at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, I was able to demonstrate this. And so the long and short of it, the piece of wood that was collected, I think in the summer of 1971 by the late Rene DeHinden, is, if you look at the film, in line with the big tree that you see in the background, there was a piece of wood that the subject either steps on or steps right next to. And because the piece of wood moves.
Right.
And so when Rene DeHinden got there, he had a copy of the movie film, and he saw this, and he took that piece of wood home as a souvenir.
Now, how big is this piece of wood?
A little over 26 inches.
And it was still there in 71.
71. And it's just like, we found debris in there, things on the film site in October of 2018 from the debris pile that's seen in the front of the film that is still there. I mean, think about it. There's really no reason for anything to move unless someone comes and takes it away.
That's
so
true.
It's not like it's McDonald's and people drive through there. It's a very remote area. And even by 1971, the film wasn't really that well known, where people would go up and say like, oh, let's just go take this piece of wood. It would have to require someone who had specific knowledge of the film, such as Rene DeHinden, to have the wherewithal and the insight to say like, I think this piece of wood not only would make a good souvenir, but maybe a good reference tool later on to measure the subject.
Now, if in 1971, if let's say somebody wanted to traverse into that area and walk into there, how far is it on foot?
From the main, well,
let's say from a main road, that a general population would be able to park their car and try to find it. I'm just trying to get an idea of how remote that was back in 71. Let
me explain this, and this may not sit well with the readership or the people watching.
Ah, well, life sucks sometimes.
In 1967, 1971, it was easier to get to the film site than it is today, because according to Richard Henry, who's now deceased, who drove Jim McLaren to the film site on November 5th, 1967, just a couple of weeks after the fact, they could almost drive up to the film site because there was a logging road there. I think it was called the Bluff Creek Road. And so I did a tape recorded interview with Richard Henry, who lived in Willow Creek, California. And he said, if I had 4-wheel drive, I could have literally driven across the creek and onto the sandbar. And so when Jim McLaren and Richard Henry went up there with Richard Henry's car, they were both looking out the window to see where this film site was. So they pretty much drove up. You can't drive up to the film site today.
Right.
So the film site was more accessible back then than it is today.
Wow.
So in terms of how far it is off the main highway, Highway 96, as you take the roads up there, maybe 20, 26 miles or something of that nature.
Right.
When you get off the main blacktop, the main highway, and start going into the woods to the film site.
So that's a haul to, we were just, Charlie, to give it a comparison, is we did an investigation up in the Allegheny National Forest, and from the main 2-lane county highway down this fire road, where we thought we were in the middle of nowhere, was just about 7.5, 8 miles. So that's triple of what we were dealing with, to give you the scale of the size of that area. You've also investigated, another one of the big investigations that you did was the Silver Star Mountain investigation. And to jump ahead just a little bit to keep things moving, is this really kind of shook me a little bit, because these pictures are the concept of where they are. Can you bring us up to speed and tell people what condition this was taken, for people that aren't familiar with it? Because we have people that may or may not be familiar with the Star Mountain photos.
Well, let me just preface that just with
Sure.
a brief. So Silver Star was another one of my investigations on my own dime. And so Tom Steinberg, my good friend in Canada, had pointed out at one time early on, he says, prior to finding Bigfoot getting on the air, that I had been to more alleged Bigfoot film sites than anyone else in the world.
On your own dime.
I never really thought about that. And I said, wow, I guess you're right about that. And I was doing all of this on my own dime. Finding Bigfoot surpassed that number because, they've got the resources to do it.
True.
Here I was on my own. But talking specifically about Silver Star Mountain in Washington State, which I don't criticize me on my geography, but I think it's sort of near Mount St. Helens. I just remember that here was the road map, how to get up there. So in May, I think it's May, June, end of May, early June, they had in 2009 the Yakima Bigfoot Roundup. And by that time, I knew the hiker who had shot those photos, and I have the camera that shot those photos because Randy Chase, an electrician, gave me the camera. So if they ever want to do experimentation with that specific camera, I have it. But so I had phoned him, and I got the phone number courtesy of Cliff Barackman.
Mm-hmm.
I had phoned him and I said, listen, after this meet, because I was going to the Yakima Bigfoot Roundup in honor of Bob Gimlin, I said, I would like to drive out to your place. We'll go from your place and we'll hike up there. And his sighting and the photos happened, if I'm not mistaken, November of 2006. So 3 years later. And so he said, sure. And he's a guy that loves the outdoors and loves to hike. And so I said, I went with him, met him. So it was an opportunity. I did a videotaped interview of him, his deposition as to what happened. So I put it in his own words, and then we went up hiked up to Silver Star Mountain. We had his camera, I had my camera, and we were trying to recreate, this is before finding Bigfoot, where the subject was and everything. And the first thing that became very obvious, I had Randy Chase be the stand-in for the subject that's seen in his digital images. And
Bill, can you bring those up in a picture-on-picture while he's talking about this, please? Okay, go ahead.
I had Randy Chase, the person who shot the photos, stand as a stand-in for the subject that you see in the pictures. And what became obvious is that if you're a man with clothing out there, it's going to be very obvious. And so that's the first thing I determined.
Right.
So the second thing I determined, it's just like, I think people said what Randy shot up there was just a guy in a hoodie, like a jacket with the hood over his head. And that became plainly not so after you do the thing. I think the thing about that makes me different than many of the investigators, I'm willing to go to do on-site investigation to say, like, to get a first-hand point of view, to know something rather than be just a keyboard warrior talking.
And just to assume and trust other people's take on it. Right. So you're getting out there. Right.
I found out firsthand by taking the eyewitness, the guy who took the photos, to the film site and to ask him questions. So that was one of my big investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very pleased by everything he told me. And to this day, I'm 100% satisfied that what he shot was a Bigfoot up there that was completely taken by surprise. What it was doing up there, I'm not sure, but it was up on the top of Silver Star Mountain. And Randy, being this avid hiker, just happened to be up there too, doing what he loves to do, hike. And he got these photos. I think there's three or four pictures of it.
Now, but with the scale, what were you able to deduce with the size? How tall do you think that creature was?
Well, what became obvious too is I had Randy Chase's camera, because we took his camera to the best of my memory, and I was looking through the camera at him, and I had some paper copies, color paper copies of the images he had with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at his camera and I'm looking at Randy Chase as our stand-in for the Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very clear that whatever was there was much wider than him and much taller than him.
Yeah.
Randy is about a little taller than me. I would say about 5'10" or so. And so what became obvious is that whatever the subject was much bigger than him.
Wow. And it was up there in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's if anybody's just joining us, this is we are doing a live super chat. This is with Dan Perez, Bigfoot researcher extraordinaire and Bigfoot Times publisher. You know, Dan, we're talking about you speaking to these lectures and teaching people. You just returned, or you're still in the middle of your Ohio trip. You're still out in Ohio, and you spoke at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. I unfortunately was unable to attend due to some family stuff, but Charlie, our field reporter, was there. Charlie, I'm going to turn this section over to you, and I'd like to see if the two of you guys can bring everybody up on what was shaken at the Salt Fork Bigfoot Ohio Conference.
I appreciate it, Brennan. Well, first of all, it was an amazing conference. It was my first time there. It was if you could afford it, definitely try to get out there. It was a great location. Salt Fork Lodge is beautiful, right in the middle of the Salt Fork State Park, I guess. The lineup was great as far as the speakers. Obviously, you had Dan Perez there. You also had Cliff Barrickman. You had Lyle Blackburn, Thomas Shea, and then Matt Pruitt as well. Yeah. Now, Dan, I know now we were in two separate rooms. I know we were upstairs, but there was also the main conference room. Were you able to talk or listen to any other people's?
I listened to Tom Shea from Kentucky. I listened to his talk from start to finish.
You did?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought he was really interesting. He has, I think he has like 256 casts that he's done.
That seemed to be the count that he said that he had cast over his career as a Bigfooter.
Were you able to talk to him afterwards too, or? I
was able to talk to him afterwards and just introduce myself briefly. I don't know if he knew who I was from Adam. And
really? Come on.
I got a photo with him. And the reason I got a photo with him, because if anyone ever asks or makes a statement that you never talked to Tom Shea or anything like this, here's the photo.
You got proof. What was Tom Shea's presentation on?
About
was-
the numerous tracks that he has found in his research area, apparently near his home. I don't think if he really went too in depth exactly where all the tracks were, but I guess he's got these numerous amounts of spiral notebooks about the details of the castings that he's made over the years. And as I told other people in my critique about Tom Shea, I said everyone starts at 100% and you can only go down from there. And so it's an extraordinary, I mean, number one, if the claim is valid that he would be far and away the most successful Bigfooter on the planet in the history of Bigfooting in terms of finding physical evidence such as trackways and casting them.
He has the famous Nutella hand cast as well. He's the one that set the that pipe with the Nutella jar in it, and apparently a Bigfoot reached in and he was able to cast the hand print from that. And I like the way he does his investigations. They actually just set up camp. They don't walk around. They just stay in the camp, do their thing, and at nighttime, everyone, I guess they sleep in shifts, and they have two people that are up at one time, and if they get any action, everyone gets woken up, and it's all hands on deck. But I was like, oh, do you have to walk in the woods or anything? That's pretty sweet.
It's called camping.
But and as far as then I'm just looking at my notes here. So, and have you ever heard Matt speak before?
I've never heard Matt Pruitt speak before, and unfortunately at this conference, because they had two conference rooms, and because of my speaking, I had to give two talks over the morning session and the afternoon session. So I didn't have the opportunity to hear Matt Pruitt, so I didn't hear his talk.
He was interesting. He had two things that really jumped out at me. Basically saying like the myths of like the Siberian tiger and like the grizzly bear and the great mountain gorilla. They were very similar myths to what Bigfoot myths are now, as far as them being supernatural, really fast, stealing kids and everything like that. So he made the comparison, which I thought was kind of interesting. Obviously, now there's a Siberian tiger in every zoo in America, so it was kind of interesting. And he also said that obviously everyone always says that there's no real experts in the Bigfoot field because there's no body to dissect. But he said that you could be an expert, like you were referring to before, Brendan, on the research, and you as well, Daniel, as the research that everyone has done. The Rene Dehindens and all the four horsemen of the Bigfoot world. And if you become an expert in that research, then you can be, I guess, considered an expert of research, just not in the actual anatomy and DNA of it. But but yeah, no, I think it was well worth the trip. If anyone is ever thinking about going out there, definitely stay at the lodge. If you can afford it, buy the VIP tickets, because my experience, you register. You get to see Dan and Cliff, and you're just hanging out, and Lyle, and you're just you're able to talk to them.
Did you get their autographs, Charlie?
Well, actually, Jamie King and I were walking through the lobby, and I saw Bobo, and I said to Bobo, I'm like, hey, my dad will kill me if I don't get a picture with you. And he's like, so it was cool.
How did that, Dan? How did the show 2021 and the COVID? How did this show differ from the shows you did when you started back in the early 90s, 94, 95? How with the feel, with technology, with the feel? Obviously, we can put the COVID thing aside, but general feel and look of the shows, how is it different from when you first started?
Today it's a lot. There's a lot more commercialism and monetization of merchandise, what they call merch. Back then, in the early days of the conferences, like the first few conferences I spoke at, the only thing they did for me was put me up in a hotel. There was no fee to speak, and unlike today where speakers are compensated.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, correct, Dan?
Well, not that much. But, like when I spoke at Don Keating's meetings in Ohio in late 1990s, it was at a high school. The event was free, and that there was very little merchandise, if anything, maybe a couple of books. And at the back of the auditorium, they had cookies and punch and a donation bowl. And that seemed to be a pretty good formula for me. But as you know, anything else, it just kind of grows. There's more people interested. And with social media, the internet, it's really exploded. And I think after the pandemic is all wrapped up, if they can wrap it up, I can see this thing being even quite a bit bigger in terms of conventions and lectures and meetings of that sort.
Did you have somebody there? And you were busy, obviously, doing the VIP, whatever the organizers have the presenters do as far as meeting certain people and going in certain luncheons or whatever. Did you have somebody or a representative of the Bigfoot Times there to sign people up? Was there a Bigfoot Times sign up spot?
No, it was just me. It's always been like a one-horse shop. And so at my vending table, it was just me. And so I broke away when I had to go give a talk and had someone there was a volunteer that filled in. I think her name was Irene. And she just came out of the blue. And I said, well, sure, if you want to man my table, then have at it. And she did. And I was very appreciative.
And did you have a clipboard, like the old-fashioned clipboard where they write down their email address and then you get in touch with them, like the bands used to do back in the day?
That era seems to be a little bit over, and just about anyone I spoke with, they wanted to sign up on the spot. I said, well,
good.
You have PayPal on your phone, and most people surprisingly did, and everyone had a phone, and so they signed up just like that. I think everybody
listening to the show should do that. You go to bigfoottimes.net. We'll put that up there. He's got 25 years coming up. The silver anniversary is coming up in a couple of years. How did you, as if the research wasn't enough, how did you, go ahead.
I want to give a plug to the Ohio Bigfoot Conference because
go ahead. We
picked up, I think, about 47 new subscribers in those 2 days or 3 days that I was there at that conference. So I'm just tickled just by being there. And in fact, some people gave me money to sign up, but most of the people just PayPal'd it. And so I was just delighted that we had that many people. I was really surprised by the number of people at that meet who knew who I was, and I try to be just below the radar screen, but apparently they knew who I was.
Well, you're very humble. You are there it is right there. Yep. Hold it up. We had it on the screen. We were putting it on the screen.
Newsletter. It'll cover my face for a moment, but this is the December 2019 edition. And this is on the cover here is our Bigfooter of the Year. And this is B. Mills. And she did some extraordinary work during 2019 and actually before that. And so she became, after 20 odd years, from 1998 to 2019, we had never had a woman be our Bigfooter of the Year. And she was the very first woman to become Bigfooter of the Year in the Bigfoot Times. So I'm happy to hold this up and show the audience.
Excellent. There should be more. There should be more women taking the lead in the Bigfoot research. You don't get a whole lot of them out there. There are great ones, but like you said, the Bigfoot of the Year for B Mills is very impressive. What got you into creating the Bigfoot Times in the first place? What was that all about? Like you didn't have enough things to do.
That's a good question. and most people who know a little bit about me, they say, where can you find Daniel Perez? And it's just like, try McDonald's. So at the time, I guess I was
your second McDonald's reference of the show.
I was doing McDonald's. It just seemed,
third one.
I like to eat there, and now I understand maybe I should focus more just on, instead of a soda, an iced tea, instead of a burger, a salad. So, and they have that on the menu now. But at the time,
too much.
Right around December of 1997, I was eating at McDonald's and I was looking at my mail. And at the time, there was several paper Bigfoot newsletters that were being mailed out to people. Don Keating had one. There was, I think, another one in Ohio. Ray Crow had a newsletter, the Western Bigfoot Society. Connie Cameron had the Bigfoot Co-op. And I said, you know what? I'm going to launch a newsletter because I wasn't necessarily overly impressed by their content.
Okay.
So I grabbed a napkin from the napkin holder and I started scribbling on it with a pen. And I'm saying, well, I think this is how this thing should look and everything.
Do you have that napkin?
No, it's gone now.
Oh.
The next thing I think I did was go over to Office Max or one of those Office Depots, one of those stores, and I bought my first IBM, I think it was an IBM ThinkPad laptop, December of 1997, and started creating the Bigfoot Times. So that's how it started, and started mailing it out. And it took no time at all to start getting members.
But you do it from start to finish. And I've got the color version one that you had, that you gave the special edition. I don't know if anybody can see this one, but I will give this one away to anybody that hits that donate button and donates anything from $1 up. The first person who does it gets this copy, and maybe I'll send it over to Dan, and Dan can sign it in that rock and roll fashion. So you're at McDonald's. You put up the idea to come up with the thing, but now you got to put it together. Now you got to write it. Now you got to lay it out. Now you got to get reports. You got to talk to people. You got to mail it. You've been doing this for 23 years. How many people are pitching in? Is it just still? Are you literally? Like I've got here, Dan, just to give you an idea, I've got the envelope here. This is what it came in, right? It's just a basic print. I thought for some reason I thought it was handwritten, the address, and I'm like, good Lord. But I mean, stamps aren't cheap, right? So you're doing all this on your own dime, and how much is the subscription?
$18.50 a year for the people living in the United States, and I think it's $22.50 for the rest of the world.
All right, so $18.50. What's stamps now? Stamps are 60 cents a piece.
I think it's 50 cents.
52 cents or something like that.
Yeah.
Envelopes. So it's so you're like, you figure you're $7 in just materials.
Yeah,
if not more.
Basically, the editor and publisher of the newsletter is working for free. So I guess
you don't have that. You don't have the Bigfoot Times jet standing by to whisk you away to Bluff Creek at a moment's notice.
I never really got into Bigfooting to make money. I got into the subject matter because I'm interested, and I think that kept me going for all these years, is because I have a developed interest, and I have never lost interest in the subject matter.
And is that what you think? I mean, what do you contribute? The not only your staying power, but it is considered the place to go when you need to know, as far as a no BS, nothing but the truth, short and concise newsletter. What is that? The staying power is just your tenacity to not give up and to go to McDonald's and come up with better ideas.
Yeah, it just I generally, when I start something, I generally stick with it, and so there's I'll keep going as long as I can. And
I love it. I do. I find it's awesome. I look forward to getting it all the time. I'm a little PO'd at myself that it took so long for me to actually subscribe to the darn thing, and for that I apologize.
No worries. The thing is, it's 4 pages, and oftentimes you see on social media or whatever, people go on and on and on about whatever it is they're talking about, and in the newsletter we cut to the chase.
Exactly.
Tell us the who, what, when, why, and where, and the significance of the finding or whatever it is that the discussion is about. And
that's funny that you said that, because that's like the perfect segue to just what I was going to be talking about next. Is in 2021 we are securely nestled in the decades of, you got Facebook, you got Instagram. I got banned from Facebook for a day or two for calling out somebody called me a hoaxer, and I said it's a bunch of, well, this is YouTube, right? A bunch of bullshit. Watch the show first before you call me a hoaxer. And I got a little slap on the wrist. And then I suggested that somebody shoot a rattlesnake, go into the woods and be prepared to shoot a rattlesnake. And that, again, broke the algorithm. And for those 2 infractions, I was sat out for 36 hours.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So that being said, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, these things are the gigantic social media platforms. Do you think that's good, or is that bad for all things Sasquatch and Bigfoot related? Not just the awareness, but the research.
It's probably bad for the research, and the serious researchers know who they are. So I think they kind of stick together. And there's a lot of people who have just maybe a passing interest or a fun interest in the topic. And who knows, maybe they're hoaxing, or maybe it's just a social dynamic for them, to a place to have a common interest, but just develop friendships and stuff. I see no problem with that, but I think there's good and bad in social media and the platforms such as Instagram and whatever it is, Facebook and
Reddit and subreddit and yeah.
Right. And I mean, it's if you've got a product, a book, or a magazine to sell, or a newsletter, I think it's a great place to promote your product there. I mean, you're reaching a lot of people with almost a zero upfront cost.
Right, my problem is the clickbait is and like you said, you made a very good point there, and I've often spoke about this, and I think Charlie can attest to it. You have the Bigfoot researchers, the serious ones who know who they are, and I consider myself a researcher, not a serious. I mean, I'm trying to be as much as time will permit. Researcher, but I don't consider myself an upper tier. I would like to someday, but I'm living in reality. What happens is you have these fans, right? So now you have suddenly Bigfoot fans. They're not necessarily researchers. They like to post things to get clicks. And whether or not there's a Bigfoot in the picture, or they say pareidolia, they're just trying to collect clicks. And to me, it seems like it's clogging the freeway of information. And like you said, the real Bigfoot researchers know who they are. And I think they live in a separate side of this whole mess that's created by the social media. Is that a fair assumption?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so. At the end of the day, I'm interested in new reports, new sightings, new footprint findings, and possibly new ideas. And it's not necessarily all on social media, so maybe you have to go to different areas.
Exactly.
Just email with a fellow colleague to find out specific information.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When I mentioned this earlier, is when we agreed to do the show. Is I'm very happy that we're doing the show, because it's not only it's forced me to read a lot of books, and I'm saying read books. I'm not saying peruse the internet and look at an article here, an article here. If I've got a guest on the show that's written a book, I'll buy their book and read the book, and it'll bring me up to speed. And it's actually opened my eyes to a lot of different ideas that people have as far as alternative, flesh and blood versus paranormal, and that this show tries to play it right down the field and give everybody a podium to speak on. And I think that's fair to share the information both ways. A lot of people see you as a reclusive Bigfoot researcher. Where did you get that moniker? And I don't know if it's an accurate assumption that you seem to be kind of this mysterious publisher of Bigfoot Times that's only known to the elite. And I don't see that. I see a friendly, warm, great personality guy. What do you think, Chuck?
Oh, absolutely, man.
Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If I were reclusive, I wouldn't have my name out there, but there's a website out there called Bigfoot Forums, and a great majority of the people on there have nicknames. But you go on to when I'm on the Bigfoot Forums, my name there is my nickname, Daniel Perez, which doesn't give away my identity.
The real Daniel Perez, is that what it is?
Yeah. So there's nothing reclusive or elusive about that. I just put my name out there, and that's all there is to it. And I guess maybe the moniker of being reclusive may not be as accurate as most people would like it to be or seem to think.
Well, everybody loves a mystery, I think. It's everybody loves, and that's the thing is, so we're an hour and 10 minutes into this conversation. It feels like we just started. We need to get to the meat and the potatoes of it now. You've been doing this stuff. You've been researching for decades. You've been out in the field. Give me the real Daniel Perez, Bigfoot myth or the real deal. What's your opinion? What's your take on that? And I'd like to know some stories or some evidence that you have to back it up. It doesn't need to be evidence, film, and audio. It needs to be what you saw or what happened, experiences that you know about.
Well, personal experiences.
Yeah.
Back to 1979, when I was still in high school. I was running around with a guy who had an interest in Bigfoot as well, Doug Trapp. And the area that was having things happen was Hemet, California, which was kind of halfway in between San Diego and Los Angeles. So, and the principals of the story were Dick and June Putnam. And so there was ongoing activity. And so I made a decision, or Doug called me up and he says, hey, would you like to go out to Hemet and look around and talk to Dick and June Putnam? The way I remember it, we drove down there, knocked on the door, nobody was home.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, okay, now what? And I said, well, while we're here, why don't we just look around? And as I recall, it had rained quite a bit before. But when we were there was no rain. And so we started driving on dirt roads, and they were awfully rutted. And so it got to the point where we had to stop the vehicle and get out and walk. And so we got out and started walking around, and we didn't even know where we were going. We were just going in the field.
Mm-hmm.
At about the same time, there was a small creek that was created by the rain runoff that we look on the ground running somewhat parallel to the creek were tracks. And
really?
So we both had that oh wow moment, like wow. And in terms of anyone planting them on us, I would say absolutely no, because we didn't even know we were going to make the trip. It was kind of a last minute deal. And so that was my first opportunity to see tracks.
Wow. And this is 1979. So people have to realize that, back then, I'm sure that Hemet, California in 1979 was much more remote.
It was a town at the time. It grew up to be a city, but at the time it was a town.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see these tracks and we get down to look at them and take some photos. And the tracks were a little bit washed away because of the rain, but the heel on several of them was very clearly defined, a very big heel, much bigger than my foot of 10 1/8 inch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I go, wow, whatever the stories were kind of confirmed by what we were looking at in the ground. And so that was my first opportunity to see tracks.
Heart's pumping, adrenaline's going.
And then later in August of 1986, up in not necessarily Northern California, but the Sequoia area south of Lake Tahoe, kind of in the interior of the state, that was a second opportunity. And the way I remember it is CNN somehow knew who I was. And they
sure. Somehow.
They placed a phone call, and I think I was living with my parents at the time, and they phoned and they told me about a sighting, about some bridge builders who were building a footbridge over the Kern River. I think there was about 5 of them, and they had a sighting, and it got picked up by the United Press International or whatever the news organization was. And they asked me if I was going to do anything about it. And I didn't really, the connectivity between people and finding people, it wasn't just a quick Google search.
Right.
So, but eventually I did find out, I said, okay, I think it's up in this area. So within the week, I drove up on the weekend and I went up there, found the people, and I was just lucky that one of the construction workers was coming out of the woods to refill their gas tanks. And so I asked them, did they know anything about this sighting? And they said, not only do we know anything about it, we're the people involved. And I said, wow, pay dirt. And I said, mind if I go back with you to interview you people? So I went back, I interviewed them, and they had a picnic table out there where they were doing the construction. And I asked them, well, the guy casually tells me, and there were footprints left too. And so as he said that, I think the next thing I did is I shut down the tape recorder.
Mm-hmm.
I said, footprints. And I said, can we see those footprints right now? By then, the tracks were probably over 10 days old. But so he goes and shows me where the tracks were. And unfortunately, it was very sandy soil where those tracks were left.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see impressions. And the way I remember it, they were about 13.5 inches long. And one of the eyewitnesses told me that this thing screamed. And he said that when this thing came into camp, that it screamed, and they knew that something extraordinary was happening in front of their eyes. And they said it felt like a stadium loudspeaker being blasted at you 3 feet in front of your face.
Now, I've heard that before from other eyewitnesses. I think that analogy is very familiar.
They said it was that loud and that piercing, and that's when they absolutely knew that the situation was happening for real, and it wasn't just some guy running around in a costume yelling.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew it was very real. And when they had that sighting, they made a decision to grab their rifle and to hightail it out of there. So they left the camp and came back later. I think it was the next day or the next day after that.
Now, are you kill or no kill? What's your stance on that?
I have no opinion on that. I have absolutely no opinion.
Fair enough.
I explained after the conference at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, I explained to some people, it's just like, just because they have laws and, you have to get a license tag to go hunt deer, that doesn't stop people from poaching.
Of course.
So
That's true.
I said whether I'm a proponent of killing a Bigfoot or whether I'm a proponent of not killing, that's not going to stop anyone. So I said, why even have the conversation?
Well, it seems to be a hotbed of arguments and fights about the kill or no kill over this hypothetical situation. You are correct. I'm a firm believer of if it's going to be proved, science would require a body, whether it gets hit by a truck or somebody takes a shot at it. I do think the Oklahoma thing is just a tourist propaganda marketing scheme for the state. I don't think it's a hunting. They're not planning on launching an actual Bigfoot hunting season. So I don't think there's any needs there. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm aware of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the guy's name who proposed this law or whatever ordinance. And it was such a newsworthy item that we said nothing. It was such a newsworthy item. I said nothing about it in the Bigfoot Times.
Exactly. I noticed how it just went right past it, and it was we brought it up on our first show because we just were testing the waters and seeing where everybody is, and it seems like a lot of people think that if this gets passed suddenly, it's the end of the world for Sasquatches everywhere. And like you said, I think it's just a marketing scheme, and I wouldn't put any weight behind it as far as affecting the day-to-day operation of life as we know it on this planet and the creatures that are here. I can't believe it's $1.20 in, Dan. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to stop by with us. I hope that you will come back someday in the future if you break your reclusivity and come down off the mountain and share some more time with us after the season, maybe sometime this winter.
I will do so.
So if you can throw up that contact screen, Bill, I would like to let everybody know if Bill's still there. How to get in touch with Dan and how to get in touch with us. If Bill, you there? There it is. To get in touch with, to subscribe to the Bigfoot Times, and I think everybody should. You can reach Dan Perez at bigfoottimes.net, and you can PayPal him the money over and have it on your doorstep next month. His Facebook is No Wonder Dan Perez. If you want to reach us, we are at Catskill Appalachian Research Collective on the Facebook page. It is From Behind Tall Trees. Dan, again, we want to thank you, and we want to thank everybody for tuning in and lighten up the comments. We had comments all over the place, not a whole lot of questions, but I think everybody was electrified by the presentation and the story. And if you liked what you guys saw tonight, make sure you join our Facebook group. Make sure you subscribe to Dan's newsletter. Dan, we wish you the best of luck out there in Ohio with the rest of your investigations or whatever that's going on there. Safe travels home, and we'll see you again soon. We got May 18th. We have MK Davis coming on, so it'll be a little. I think he was Bigfooter of the Year one year with you, correct?
December of 2006.
Yes. So he is busy dodging tornadoes right now because they've had a lot of tornadoes down in the Biloxi area. So we hope that MK and all of his friends and family are safe. June 1st, we got Thomas Steenberg will be joining us. So we've got the legend himself. And then David Ellis and Julie Wrench return on June 15th. So to that note, I want to thank everybody. Charlie, thanks for filling in for Sean.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Feel free to step up and you can jump in a little bit more next time. But I think you did a great job for your first show.
Like at the conference, I was just so so interested in listening to Dan that I didn't want to say a thing. But Dan, I want to say thank you again for taking the time to speak with me after the conference at the bar. I mean, we spoke for some time, so I definitely do appreciate the the time you did spend. So
he didn't get all drunk and weep on your shoulder, did he, Dan?
No.
I'm just kidding. I don't even know if Charlie drinks, but
yeah, I was drinking.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks to everybody. You guys have a great night. Be safe. Be good. Stay safe, and keep on watching. Bill, you can play us out and say good night.
Good night from behind tall trees. If you enjoyed the previous program, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment.